In a world where even the smallest disagreements can lead to arguments, violence, and even death, two brothers tackle the difficult subjects. This podcast is not just about dissecting topics from two different perspectives. It's also about how to have conversations on difficult topics while avoiding the urge to tear someone's head off and vomit down the bloody stump of their neck. So in this conversation, we want to talk a little bit about some of the issues that we're seeing right now in terms of supply and demand, and when the two don't meet, and who's to blame, and how to fix it, and all that sort of thing. And so if you're agreeable, Colin, I want to break it into three parts. And because we're finding that the timing is an issue, let's kind of plan ahead. We spend a part of the time talking about gas, because we just hit an all-time high. Spend part of the time talking about baby formula, because that's a very popular conversation topic right now. Lots of blame going around there. And I want to spend a little bit of time looking forward, talking about in particular wheat and some of the other cereal grains, because what we're hearing in the news right now is this is going to become the next shortage. So you can think about that as like looking forward. How do we try and address the issues to fix future problems?
Okay.
You want to start with gas or the baby formula?
Yeah, gas is fine.
Okay. So when we had originally thought about having this conversation, I went to give myself a little crash course in the commodities and the prices in the market and how the whole thing works. And it's a little bit, for people that have an understanding of how the stock market works, it's similar, but it's different in the sense that you can buy commodities like oil, the present price, what it's going for right now, and then a future contract. And the future contract is really an anticipation of what people think the market will be like and what the general economy will be like at whatever date you want to buy that contract. And so the reason why this is important is because when someone buys, let's say, some stock in Tesla, one of the things you're purchasing is an anticipation of what the company will be like in the future. But it doesn't work the same way in oil, in the sense that if you're anticipating some future activity, you buy the future contract. You don't buying the present oil doesn't impact future price. You're just buying a barrel of oil now. And likewise, if something changes in the marketplace, let's say all of a sudden there's they're saying we're going to have great massive oil production a year from now because of things we're doing in the drilling right at the moment. It's not going to affect price right now. It'll affect the price of the futures contract a year from now. Does that make sense?
Well, I guess I'd take issue with a couple of things, and maybe we just need to talk through it so I can understand. But I mean, the future contract, you're not buying what you think. When you buy a futures contract, it's not that you think the price will be that in the future. It's that for example, if you work for an airline and you're going to need to buy gasoline or jet fuel or whatever, you might say, well, I think that the price of jet fuel is going to go up. So I'm going to lock in my price at a lower amount than it will be in the future. Now, if in the future the prices don't go up, then you've kind of wasted your money on that futures contract. I think that's kind of more the purpose of futures contracts. It's not, buying it what you think the price is going to be. It's trying to prepare for the future. If you're selling fuel, you might say, well, let's get locked into the future, because if prices go down, then I know I can at least sell it for this price, and vice versa. And I guess the point you're trying to make is the price of gasoline. If there's something that's going to happen in the future that will affect the supply and or the demand of gasoline, you're saying it won't affect prices now, because there's futures contracts. Is that right?
I'm saying it won't affect, I should clarify, you're right. It won't affect the price at the pump. You won't see the price of the pump change because of some future event. It's not until that event occurs that the price at the pump changes.
I don't know. I guess, I mean, I think there's some truth to that, but I think there certainly are instances where there is an event that could happen in the future, or that there's a fear that it will happen in the future that definitely affects, or that would presumably affect prices now. And I'm no expert on this, but let's maybe talk through an example, and maybe we can poke holes in the idea or confirm it. I mean, it does seem like if you, for example, thought, well, let's give the example that we're probably talking about now, which is Biden. And when he came into office and he said, I'm going to stop fossil fuel production. I'm going to stop it. We need it to go away, which was a statement that he made, or some, I guess I'm paraphrasing, but it was pretty close to that. I mean, he was pretty adamant that we're going to stop fossil fuels. We're going to, move away from it. And the question, I guess, is, does that affect the price of gasoline now? I mean, to some degree, you're right that, yeah, we would just keep going along as we are now. But I mean, I don't know how long it takes before people, it becomes all of a sudden, it might seem more risky to invest in fossil fuels, even, or, for example, if you have a production facility and you're thinking, well, what am I going to do to improve this or whatever, you're going to be less inclined to invest because, even, in something that is going to yield long-term dividends, because you're saying, well, Biden has assured me that he's going to make it difficult for me. So it's a risky environment, so I'm unwilling to invest. And I think you'd start seeing, the long-term results would be greater, but you're likely going to start seeing effects in the short term too, maybe just not as great. I would agree that if there's something that's going to happen in the future, it's not going to have as much of an effect now as it will in the future. But I still think there's going to be an effect now.
Well, I think the effect that we see now is, I mean, you're right that people, they kind of test the temperature of the investment environment. And so you're right that there's some reluctance to move forward because of the regulations changing, maybe getting more stringent with things like fracking. And so if you are thinking about doing some exploration to see if it makes sense to put in some more wells, you might say, well, I'm not sure if I want to go that route because it's going to be more difficult to open up those wells. So we're not, but that choice of doing the exploration or the investigation won't impact the supply at the moment. It would impact the supply of whenever those wells would hypothetically start producing. And so the way that it can impact prices right now is with things like maintenance, where I was hearing that when the prices were first going up, that they were having a really hard time repairing some of these wells. When a lot of the wells shut down during the shutdown, and then they had to go and ramp them back up again, and they were having trouble finding people to go and run them, people to go and repair them, finding parts to go and repair them. And so that was a direct result of some of the I guess the environment at that moment. And that was a pretty unusual experience because we don't often have a shutdown where prices go negative. But at the same time, there are going to, and that was more of a supply issue than a regulation issue. But I mean, you're right in the sense that the regulation can affect the overall environment. It's just not going to have as effective or as strong an impact as things like maintaining the wells or things like that.
Well, but yeah, I think you're trying to minimize it and point out that, yeah, the effect would be more long term, but and that's true to some degree. But just as an example, let's say you're a company. I mean, some of these companies, they're struggling to raise money, and or they're cash strapped, and these regulations come out, and all of a sudden they go to and then they go to the bank and say, hey, we need another loan, or we need an extension of our loan. We can make the payments, just give us some time. And the bank says, oh, no. I mean, there's too much risk out there. Like if I saw huge profits, I'd feel better about it. But you guys are running pretty close to the edge anyway. And now they're threatening greater legislation. They're threatening shutting down a ton of these oil leases. No, we can't give you any more money. That could affect people in the short term, restrict their ability to do the maintenance that they need to, or to even stay open. So when there's a regulatory environment that is decidedly restrictive and has come out and said, hey, we are going to, I mean, I guess it's somewhat difficult to pinpoint exactly what all the regulations are. Just like when we say, well, Donald Trump removed some regulations, like, well, which ones? I don't know. And what effect did they have? I don't know. That would take an expert to tell us. But when they're coming out and telling us, hey, we are going to restrict the production of fossil fuels. And then how long, I mean, it's been like, how long are we into the administration? It's been a while now. And then they're going to say, oh, well, we said we would, but it's not going to have any effect on anything now. It's going to affect things later. I mean, that seems crazy to me. Now,
Well,
if we're going to put it all, where we can't put it all at the point of Biden. I mean, I know there's more to it than his regime. Like, there's a lot to this increase in prices, and it's not just Biden. But to say he's got nothing to do with it, or very, very little, I find that hard to believe. He promised he would.
right. And I mean, he can't stop, or at least he said he was not going to stop production that was already up and running. What he said was he wasn't going to start any new exploration or investigation. And I did come across in a report in July 2020, which of course was 6 months into the Biden administration. According to Deloitte, U.S. shale industry was registering a net negative free cash flow, meaning that the money that was coming out of the shale oil production was less than the money that was going into the production. And that there also was more than 190 bankruptcies in the industry since 2010, which is supporting the claim that the industry has peaked without ever making any money. And so
the industry has peaked without making any money. What do you mean? Like
the shale oil production industry, not the oil in general.
But there's other people that are making money with shale oil production, right? I mean, it depends. It could change weekly. Like, I mean, if oil is $100 a barrel versus $30 a barrel, then all of a sudden shale looks a lot more appealing, right?
Right. Yeah. And so they're looking at the entire shale industry in general. When you consider, that there's lots of exploration that happens, and I don't know what the percentage is, but let's say maybe 30% of the exploration actually ends up in producing, wells and producing oil. So there's investigation with the hope that at some, future point, you'll make up the money, sort of like R&D in biotech. You want a viable drug so that you can offset the cost of the R&D. And so exploration falls in that same category. Not all exploration ends up in money making. And so whatever is happening in the shale, and that may be due to the fact that prices dropped so low a little while back. And this is not me, this is from Deloitte saying that, yeah, they've from $300 billion cash flow from a $450 billion in invested capital.
Wait, that was one company. That was
the industry.
The industry, yeah. I don't know. I'd have to do some research under the shale oil industry. I'm not an expert on it, but
yeah. No, it was just an interesting, perspective on the whole thing, and it was if you look back to a few months ago when people were so irate about the price of gas, there was this jump to the conclusion that we need to blame the president administration for the present situation, and I think that yes, let's say that if Biden were to reverse course and say, okay, well, we're because of the economic crunch, we're now going to allow free reign. We're going to open up Alaska for oil exploration. We're going to start to dig, go into the Gulf of Mexico, all these things. It wasn't going to have an impact on the price that we were seeing at the pump because we would not see an increase in supply for quite a while. And so there was, you could perhaps blame Biden for the atmosphere, but you could not look to Biden to solve the problem.
Yeah, well, we just gave, we were just giving examples of how it could have an effect in the short term, not as much, but it could have an effect. And then you go to the long-term effects and say, well, but then you're discounting when you talk about Biden and discounting the fact that there could be short-term effects as well. I mean, we were just talking a minute ago. Yeah, a lot of this stuff is long-term effects, but there definitely is going to be a short-term effect. So to say, well, he can't have any short-term effects after we just said, well, there are short-term effects to what he's doing. Yeah, he
No,
can have short-term effects.
you said there were short-term effects. I didn't.
Okay, well, I made the argument that there was. I made some points as to why there were short-term effects. If you want to dispute that, then you can dispute it.
I wasn't going to, because I don't I want, I'm keeping mindful of the time, and I at some point, because the formula shortage is very much at the surface right now. I did want to move on to that in a little bit, and
Okay.
So if you want to keep going on the gas, I'm happy to, but I do want to transition at some point soon.
No, yeah, I'm ready to move on. I guess the only thing I would say about it is I think, as you're pointing out, it is very true that there are a huge, frankly, we oftentimes, both with Trump and with Biden and with every president, we ascribe too much power to them. Supply and demand is so complex. There's so many factors that go into it, like the production of OPEC, of Russia, of regulation, the regulatory environment, what's just happening in general, the economy as a whole, inflation. I mean, inflation has to presumably has something to do with this as well, which, Trump pumped plenty of money into the economy, and Biden just kept doing the same. I mean, it's $6 trillion at least that's put in there. That's going to have some effect on it too. There's
Sure.
very many factors. You're right. It's not all on Biden. But I guess we can disagree on how much we can ascribe to him.
Right. Now, if we transition to baby formula, I don't know that you can blame Biden for it, but the federal government does bear a fair amount of responsibility for the baby formula shortage. We talked briefly about it. You want to give the summary of how you see the situation?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the article in front of me, but there are some restrictions from the federal government on America importing, companies importing baby formula from Europe, of all places, which you would think we feel pretty safe about. But there's plenty of other places we could be getting it too. It's not the most complex formula in the world, I wouldn't guess. Anyway, there's restrictions on us importing baby formula from different places, and then there is some talk. Oh, well, I guess so. That's one of the major issues that I think that we see is when you're restricting the supply of a product, then the price of that product will go up. If you flooded the market with all of that baby formula from other places, or flooded is maybe too strong a word, but if you allowed that in, then prices necessarily would come down. That's just how supply and demand works. So for them to act surprised about this, when it is kind of nice in some ways when you get this kind of unexpected look at some government interference where nobody knew. Who would have known that there was this restriction on the supply of baby formula into our country? But now we know, and hopefully they'd be willing to do something about it. But yeah, I think that's a big part of why we're having the supply shock that we're having. We probably would still have one, but it wouldn't be as great.
Well, and of course, the reason why we're having a bit of a shortage here is because one of the major producers had their production facility shut down because of it was unhygienic, and there was I guess a couple of babies got sick, a couple of babies died. Some people were blaming the baby formula. The company that produces the baby formula says it wasn't them, and so the FDA went in and investigated, and they felt like there was some possibility for bacteria showing up. Babies are very susceptible to it, and so they shut the production down. And the reason why one company had such an impact on the amount of baby formula is that in the US, there are 3 companies that produce 90% of the baby formula that's consumed. In fact, there's 2 companies that produce 80% of the baby formula that's consumed in the country, by babies, of course. And so that shutting down that one production facility, that one factory, took away 40% of the amount of products going out on the market. And then you have the addition of, some of the supply chain issues that have been still slightly around, but not quite as dramatic. As you mentioned, the fact that the FDA was they didn't like it's not that they didn't feel it was unsafe. They felt they didn't like the way that the companies, they had some requirements about what sort of labeling was used. And they felt like the companies from Ireland and other countries in Europe weren't meeting the FDA guidelines on labeling. And so because of that, they wouldn't allow the countries to import their material. And so as a result, we're having this huge problem with baby formula in the US. Now, I mean, the obvious. Go ahead.
Does that seem realistic to you, Brian, though? I haven't looked too much into that, but how is it possible that there's a company, they've got this huge market in America, and they're unwilling to change their labels? Does that seem like an oversimplification? That doesn't seem like a reasonable explanation for why they'd be restricting it. I mean, it could be, but I mean, that just doesn't pass the smell test for me.
You feel like there's something's more nefarious, something more evil going on?
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be evil or nefarious. I don't think most of the issues that you see with government intervention is evil or nefarious. I'm just saying, like, if you were a company in Ireland and you're like, we got to change the labels or we can't go to America. Nah, that's too much. We're not going to do it. Like, wouldn't you just change the labels? Like, these are big companies. They can change labels. I've done it here at the store. I've done it in my own life. Like, I'm pretty sure these companies can figure it out. There's got to be more to it than that. It just seems like an oversimplification. Do you disagree?
Well, no, I don't. I don't know. This is just what I've read from the articles that were being put out about it. I did hear that Canada was unwilling to import because of some tariffs. There was.
Okay, that I could believe. Now we're getting somewhere. That passes the smell test. I could see us doing that because, that there's a great incentive for a company like us to do that. But yeah, okay, go on. Sorry.
No. Someone was commenting that the government was protecting the U.S. dairy farmers, and so they had some tariffs on Canada. That's pretty common between the U.S. and Canada, kind of going back and forth. And I don't know if there's something going on the other side as well. But yeah, I mean, tariffs are a common method of trying to limit some of these products coming into the U.S. for sure. And there may be tariffs across the ocean as well, not just from Canada. Maybe that's part of the reason over there.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
We lost volume on you, Colin.
Good.
Oh.
Can you hear me?
Yes. A little quieter, but I can hear you.
How funny. It's like, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. It just doesn't seem to make any sense that the problem would be labeling. That's such an easy one to fix. I could see there being, there's all sorts of tariffs out there. That one, we're trying to protect our own interests. I could see that happening, but I'm just not surprised. Like, when the market works, when we don't interfere in the market, it typically works. It kind of harkens back to some of the discussions we've had about monopolies. Like why do you think there just are three companies that control all the baby formula production?
Because they bought up all the other companies? I don't know. I mean, actually, I was curious if that was the case, and I didn't have a lot of time, but I did put the search in to see if it would pull up any results. And as I was going through, all the news that's coming out right now is about the present situation, not a whole lot about past situations. So I don't know if there was a lot of consolidation going on in the industry. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting when you think about those big companies because, as I often say, these big companies that have a great amount of control in the market, it's interesting that they don't just raise prices. Like, if these we always talk about the corporate greed and how they don't have the people's best interest at heart. But let's just look at Amazon, for example, or Walmart. I mean, companies with huge amounts of market power. Have they gone in, like, do you go to Walmart and think, oh my gosh, the prices are so high here? Or, I mean, we just don't do it. You go there and you think, I mean, if anything, what you do is you think, oh, the prices are so low, but the material's kind of crappy.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
but they don't go in and say, well, I have a huge amount of market power. You have to buy my crappy stuff and I'll charge you massive amounts of money for it. And the reason why they don't is because the only reason you keep that market power is by not charging, not huge amounts of profit taking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you charged a massive amount of money and Walmart all of a sudden was making obscene amounts of money, well, then the market gets flooded with everybody like, oh, I can sell baby formula for $2 less than that and still make money because they're charging too much. So, they don't have this, even the companies that have massive amounts of market share, they can't go in and charge huge amounts of money. And we see that they don't. I mean, McDonald's, these Walmart, Coca-Cola, they don't go in and charge massive amounts of money because they know if they do, then somebody else is going to come in and do it for less. They can only take so much. They do take profits, obviously,
Right.
but it's on massive amounts of volume and smaller margins, because if they increase their margins, then they have massive amounts of competition, right?
Well, and there's a certain amount of speculation that has to happen about what happens in this particular industry, because you and I don't know we're quite knowledgeable about a lot of different things, but we're not when it comes to the production of baby formula. We're falling a little short here, so a little bit of guesswork. But from what I have heard in some of the conversations is that in the production of baby formula, it's not that difficult, but it's very important that it's very clean, because babies are very sensitive to bacteria. A lot of the formula that's being used is because some of these babies have certain allergies or certain conditions, and so they have to be very careful. So, kind of extrapolating off of this information that's coming out about this, I'm going to guess that there may be some restrictions about being able to get into production. It's not something you can do on your kitchen table, because one of the things that's been going around is, well, can I make some baby formula at home? And the doctor is saying, no, don't do that. Do not do that, because of the bacteria issues that is going around. So I don't want to say it's the equivalent of making pharmaceuticals where you need that level of clean, but I do think it's cleaner than most food production, I think.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that could be, but I mean, the fact remains, these big companies, even if they do buy up other companies, there's only so much they can do, because there's always competition. Unless there's some sort of restriction from, too much regulation or some barrier to entry from the federal government, like we see from these tariffs and from the restrictions on labels, which somehow is convincing these companies that I really just don't believe that. It doesn't make any sense to me.
I hear that from you. You're very dismissive of the label argument.
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe we should look into it, man. If I could be proven wrong, just tell me how that could even work. Like, oh, well, they got too many label restrictions there. We're not going into that company. It's like the easiest thing. You just change your printer. These guys, there's no way. There's no way that's gonna stop people from bringing baby formulas here. That to me feels like lazy reporting. That some reporter was like, "Oh, this is the reason." But I mean, who could believe that? It doesn't make any sense. But
I probably heard it from Fox News.
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, I mean, well, you and I, as we've done research on some of these different issues, it does feel like there's a tremendous amount of lazy reporting out there, right? I mean, when we looked at the Rand Paul issue, and nobody would go to, like, first of all, nobody was showing what his explanation really was, and then all it would have taken, it shouldn't have taken very long for them to then tear it apart or confirm it.
Right.
Like, even we found out, well, here's his explanation. Nobody was saying, but his explanation is bogus because look what he said back then, and it's demonstrably proven wrong. Like, that would have been an easy one to prove out. Like, the reporting seems very, and for all I know, they could have done that. That would have been easy to do to prove him wrong. I don't know.
Yeah.
But the reporting does seem lazy on all these different types of things. So there is going to be some restriction. That's typically where you see monopoly power coming from, is either, they keep prices low because they're keeping the competition out, or there's some sort of government interference.
Well, we hit the 10-minute warning from our feed over here, and so if you're comfortable, I want to transition to wheat, because it sounds like what I'm hearing on the news is this is going to be the next big problem. The reason is that, one, Ukraine produces a large portion of the wheat that is used around the world. And then some news came out a couple of days ago where India has said that they're going to stop exporting wheat because they've been having such a problem with drought. They want to keep all their wheat in country. And so that's going to, again, I don't know how much of the production or world usage of wheat comes from India, but that's bound to have an impact. So we have these market forces that we have no control over, supply issues that are going to come into effect. And I was curious if, if you could imagine, looking forward, how as a consumer we could plan, as a country we could plan, are there things that you would have in mind that we could do about this?
Well, the first thing that I think we should do is stop all farm subsidies in this country and tariffs on foreign goods. I think that would be a great step in the right direction. But it's interesting. I think this is going to illustrate one of the major factors that I believe makes the market economy so effective. If the price of wheat goes up, or even if we have very good reason to believe that it will go up, you will see a drastic increase in the production of wheat immediately. So not to say that it's going to solve all of our problems, but I think that is the power of the market system. If we allow the price of wheat to go up, then all of a sudden, all these other countries, like the countries we don't even know about that can produce wheat, are going to have so much more incentive to produce wheat. So I do like the fact that we know about it. It is interesting. One of the things when you were discussing the baby formula shortage, it seemed like they should have known what was happening. Yeah. And if they had kind of come out with it a little bit and said, hey, the price of baby formula is going to go up, we're going to have to be aware of this. And maybe that would have helped maybe the other producers already knew, or maybe they could have said, hey, we'll help you print your labels in Ireland. or ease some of the restrictions on the label making, or the label writing or something, to allow found some way to bring some of that product here, work with some of those companies in Ireland or Canada and said, let's get your stuff here, ease some of the tariffs in the short term. Like, there's so many things they could have done, or even just talking about it would have helped to prepare us for it. So at least we're talking about it now. But yeah, I think the fact that the price will increase and that people can expect it to increase will increase the supply. But I think, yeah, we should do a whole discussion, Brian, on farm subsidies in our country, because it's atrocious. I mean, they're doing things like they subsidize all the sugar production, all these different farmers. They restrict competition from other countries. And then they pay farmers to destroy their crops once they're produced at times. Right. Are you aware of that? That's how they sometimes, if they're worried about the price of milk going too low because there's too much milk on the market, so they'll pay farmers to not sell their milk, to just let it go bad, So they're doing all sorts of things to disrupt the market. And when you distort the market that way and you restrict people from other countries bringing it in because you're subsidizing our producers here, then they can't, they're not as productive as they could be, and we're doing things, then we're not being as effective as we could be or should be with our food production.
Well, and one of the challenges with something like wheat is that, if we're talking about it right now, someone can't say, oh, I can grow some wheat and I'm going to go and put it on the market tomorrow, because of course wheat has a growing period, a gestation, if you will. And so it's not, and it may also be determined by climate. And so, maybe this is the prime time to be planting your wheat. But if the prime time was a month ago and you missed the window, well, you can't do anything about it until next year. So it's a difficult one to get ahead of, because it has such a slow moving cycle that we have to be able to adapt to.
Well, I mean, but even when you start to see the price, you're right, and that's going to be difficult. And I think you will see a bit of a price increase, because they're just not going to be able to up production as fast as they would like. But I think people are pretty adaptive and they're pretty innovative. I mean, even something as small as there might be a country that has a lot of wheat, and if the price, it becomes all of a sudden very profitable for them to export their wheat to America or to Europe or someplace else, then maybe the people in that country are going to be more willing to eat something else.
Yeah,
because
maybe.
because the prices in their country are going to go up, and then they eat more soybeans or whatever else, rice or whatever. I think we'll start to see when the price goes up, then all of a sudden people will then find all sorts of other ways to reduce the cost to them. And then that's how the market is so effective, because if you were, the czar of the world czar or the food production czar or whatever, and you tried to tell people how much they should produce or where it should be sent, there's just too many moving parts. But when prices go up, the incentive is there for people to innovate, to eat less of one thing and more of something else or whatever. Hold on just one sec, Brian. I'm just on a phone call. Yes. Having kids is the worst. I'm on a phone call. You can have it on it too. When you want donuts, just ask your dad when he's on a Zoom call.
Oh yeah. Yep.
But anyway, yeah, I think that'll be an interesting thing. But I do believe that the distortions to the market in America are just atrocious. I mean, there's those that we just talked about, the subsidies and the tariffs. On top of that, I think it's a really interesting idea that in California, we produce so much food in California. And I haven't delved into this too much, but I believe they're running out of water there.
Yeah.
And water is so cheap for people. And just as an example, this reporter, when I read this one news story, this reporter went out there and was looking at food production and how little water there was. And they were looking at rice. And they would flood the fields with water to water the rice, just like you see in those pictures in Vietnam or China, right, or something. And he's like, well, why do they do that? You lose so much water to evaporation. They're like, well, because it's expensive to bring in that machinery and the water's so cheap.
Yeah.
So the incentives are messed up because the government probably should be charging more for that water.
Yeah.
But I mean, anyway, I guess I can get off topic.
Yeah, we do. And I do want to take just one quick moment and say that in the last few seconds here that we have been beating on the government quite a bit in this episode. At the same time, there were a couple babies died, 2, very small number, and they shut down the production facility in order to protect the rest of them. At least that's the idea. Companies saying that wasn't the case. And so, one of the challenges to bureaucracy is that when one bureaucrat has information, it doesn't always get to the one that can actually do something about it. But every now and then, the government does step in a way that does help people. And so I think, they could do a whole lot better. But in that one situation, they did all right. So, in our last few seconds, thank you, Colin. I appreciate it. And we will do this again next week.
Okay, thanks, Brian.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
We hope you learned something in this episode of Brother versus Brother, a podcast about difficult conversations. We also hope that you enjoyed it enough to subscribe to the podcast. You can help us by spreading the word. Share this episode on your favorite social media so that others will have an opportunity to experience it as well. You can also support us by donating through Patreon. This information and more can be found on our website, broconvo.com, and on our various social media accounts. Thank you.